2, 1. You all are live now.
Parikshit bhai?
Yeah, well, welcome to this special webinar on COVID organized by the Maharashtra Ophthalmology Society. It's something which is slightly different, which is out of the ambit of our usual eye care. But in view of the pandemic that has been raging on for almost the past year and which has affected all of us in so many different ways, we thought this is the right time to take stock of the situation as practices are opening up and we are not sure how much work to do and what precautions to take. So I would request our learned chairman scientific committee, Professor Agini Pari, to take over and start the scientific deliberations.
Thank you, Dr. Parikshit bhai. Good evening, friends. It is such a pleasure to have three Padma Shris together on this platform today. And they being our mentors and guides, they willingly agreed to be a part of this program we have put together. We have with us Padma Shri Dr. Ganga Khetkar sir, Padma Shri Dr. Keki Mehta sir, Padma Shri Dr. Lahane sir, my classmate, Dr. Vasant Nagvekar, our very own Dr. Sagar, who is going to talk on his experiences, and Dr. Sunny. Dr. Parikshit Bhai is an able president of the Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society, and the team of Pankaj Bhai and Sirish Bhai, who's the secretary, and Swapnesh. These three musketeers run around and do all the work, and I think they succeeded in putting this program together. The committee today's chair also consists of Dr. Viral Shah, a dynamic surgeon from Nagpur, and Dr. Swati Zawar, who is such a great academician. And Todd is hosting the platform. Good evening, Dr. Lahane, sir. And so I think without wasting much time, I really am blessed to have you all. We are really blessed to have you all together. And without wasting much time, we will give the platform to our speakers whom we are so eager to listen to.
Thank you. Ganga Khetkar sir, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
चांगलं वाटलं तुम्ही आलात, मला आनंद झाला.
Sir, Keki sir is also joining.
म्हणल्यावर येणार नाही असं होणार नाही, sir.
Daddy, good evening.
Good evening, Jay. Good evening.
Good evening, Vasant. Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. So we can start with our first presentation. That is Dr. Sagar. Would you please share your slide?
So something about yeah.
Can I introduce Sagar first?
Yes, Dr. Shirish, please introduce Dr.
So Padma Shri, Dr. Keki Mehta sir.
Today we have
yes.
Yeah, we can introduce the panelists and then we can introduce.
Let me
Dr.
introduce
Sagar.
the panelists first.
So
hello.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a great honor for me to introduce Dr. Keki Mehta sir, who actually doesn't need any introduction. He was the past president of BOA and AIOS, organizing president of IADVANCE for more than 20 years. He is an internationally renowned due to pioneering of his work. He has many firsts to his credit, and he has awarded with many awards. Specifically, the Padma Shri is one of them. And we are lucky to have Dr. Keki Mehta, a living legend in ophthalmology, as the chairman of this session for today's. We have Dr. Parikshit Gokte as a co-chairman, my best friend and honorary president of MOS. And he is known for his community and research work nationally and internationally. He has conducted 8 clinical trials and presented many papers He's a writer of books, are well known and conducted and instrumental in many courses nationally and internationally. Let me present to you Parikshit and Chairman Dr. K.K. Mehta. Now over to Dr. Pankaj Shah. Pankaj, please share your screen.
Yeah. Dr. Sabyachi Sengupta, he is a prolific young dynamic vitreoretinal surgeon of Future Vision Eye Care Mumbai. He is founder and director at Sengupta's Research Academy and associate editor at Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. He did his DO and DNB from Shankar Nethralaya. He is a fellow Wilmer Eye Institute and has published more than 90 articles in peer-reviewed journals. He is a McCartney Prize from ophthalmologist. We have with us Viral Shah, who is a young dynamic ophthalmologist from Nagpur. He is anterior segment surgeon. He has a vast training experience with him. He has been on advisory board at Swami Sitaram College for Ophthalmic Technicians also. He is committed to Ophthalmic and Medical Society. He was a past president of Ophthalmic Society of Nagpur. Presently a chairman scientific committee Vidarbha Ophthalmic Society and managing committee Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society. I always call him as Viral Shah due to his viral presence everywhere. We have Swati Zawar madam, who has done her PhD recently in community ophthalmology. She is from Nasik and she will be also one of the co-chairman of sessions. Thank you.
Stop sharing the screen, Pankaj.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
I would request now Dr. Sagar to please share his screen.
Let me introduce Sagar.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, Dr. Sagar.
Yes, both Dr. Sagar.
So the topic given to me was basically my first-hand experience during the COVID duties. I tried to cover this from an ophthalmologist point of view. For me, the pandemic, it has really evolved. It has really evolved from an utter state of disorganized, chaotic, fear-studded state with ill-defined treatment and practice protocols in the initial days to an organized, well-oiled public health infrastructure thing with substantially clear guidelines regarding the practice patterns and treatment protocols, minus the fear factor. As far as I am concerned, this fear factor was the major thing which was responsible for most of the wrong happenings during this early part of the pandemic. Most of my experiences, either good or bad, are from the initial days, that is from April to August. Basically, there were three types of healthcare teams working in this pandemic. Few of them took care of the quarantine centers. The second team was the ward medical staff, which handled the mild to moderate symptomatic patients, either positive or non-tested suspected patients. And the third team, which played a very crucial role, was the ICU medical staff, which managed the critically ill or the severely symptomatic patients. My scope, I was part of the second team, that is the ward staff, and my scope of work was mostly admitting and attending patients in the ward who were either proven positive on RT-PCR or non-tested suspected pneumonia patients, monitoring their vitals, getting their PCR samples, and following the recommended treatment and referral guidelines. Now, it sounds really easy. It is, but only when there are no logistic challenges. If you have an ICU bed available, it's very easy to manage these patients in ward with the recommended treatment guidelines. If the SpO2 starts falling, you can refer him to an ICU, but the situation gets tricky when there are no ICU beds available. it is especially more difficult managing these patients with cylinder supplied oxygen, as the luxury of having a central O2 line is not available in most of the peripheral public hospitals, that too in non-medicine wards, which were converted to COVID wards in this pandemic. There were also some bigger problems. The bigger problems like having an hard copy and RT-PCR report for a patient who was declared COVID positive at 1 a.m. at night in the last cycle, which was declared by the central lab. The positive ward system won't take transfer of these patients. All it needed was simple conviction and commitment from the administrative authority that installing a computer with a printer so that we can have a hard copy. So these are like very laughable, big problems with simple solutions, and they were taken care of. Declaring someone dead doesn't come naturally to an ophthalmologist. We are not trained in such situations, and we don't handle emergencies quite often. I still remember when I had to face it for the first time, and it was quite horrifying. The supply chain was always on the shorter side. The PPE kits, N95 masks, they were literally rationed at the peak of the first wave. You really had to think twice before using washroom while you're on duty, because you were just supplied one PPE kit per duty. So that was quite difficult. There were also some physical challenges. The first peak was really hot in terms of temperature. In most part of Maharashtra, during peak summers, the temperatures are somewhere between 35 to 48 degrees. If you wear a PPE kit, it will definitely protect you, but it will just suck you all fluids from the body. You will have severe dehydration, weight loss. The stress was also killing. The stress of acquiring infection, the stress of transmitting the infection, the stress of having a breach in the protective barrier. So it was quite something to face. The social and family concerns were also there. Being tagged as a COVID warrior sounds really glamorous, but it was also a social taboo for some. I'm really sorry for the background noise, but there's a marriage procession which is passing by. I really can't help. There was also media chaos. I still remember that I happened to operate a patient who was a medico, and he turned out to be COVID positive on the very next day of surgery, post-op day 1. I immediately started getting calls from the so-called WhatsApp journalists that how can you operate a patient who was COVID positive and pose a threat to the community. So it was quite stressful. The emotional stress of almost staying 15 days in a month away from your family was enormous. 8 days of duties followed by 8 days of quarantine in the initial part of the pandemic. The financial responsibilities were also there because there was no elective work, there was no revenue generation. I have heard that in bigger cities with corporate hospitals, they have slashed their staff salaries, but we can't do it at smaller centers and smaller cities like ours. We also have to take care of their insurances and the health benefits of the staff, not only for them, but also for their families. The practice pattern also got altered. There were new patterns of online consultation popping up. It was also a blessing in disguise, as the work was limited, but was quality work. Suddenly all the red eye, kuch to bhi chupta hai patients, they got vanished from the OPD. There were no evening OPDs, so eventually it was more family time. Now, these are just hopes and prayers. There's also a talk by Dr. T.P. Lahane sir, but I really hope that there will be a light at the end of this tunnel. I really salute all those who have contributed directly and indirectly for the COVID cause. No matter how small the contribution was, it always mattered. Field leaders like Dr. T.P. Lahane sir, with great commitment and conviction towards the cause, have time and again shown what difference a single person can cause to the bigger outcome. Thanks.
Thanks, Sagar. That was a wonderful presentation, and really heartfelt, emotional support that you got from my family was also very important, so that you could continue this 45-day duty. I request Ragini madam to give her inputs.
Dr. Sagar, it was such a heartfelt talk. What you went through could be, in the 8 minutes, we could see what, it was like a film running through our minds about the life that you led. And what you really said, that if we don't see deaths, and when we are suddenly faced with something different, but to have done this, to have gone through it, and to have helped the society and the community, and your story is so inspiring for the residents who are still working in COVID. And I agree with you that Dr. Ganga Khedkar or Padma Shri Lane sir have been such positive sources of inspiration to all of us in these trying times. Thank you so much. The talk will inspire the people who are still working in COVID to go on and will be able to save more lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Ma'am, can we move on to Sir's talk?
Yes.
Lane Sir's talk?
Yes.
So I request Dr. Keki sir to please introduce Dr. Lane sir. I think there's everybody knows everything about Lane sir, but yes, all the youngsters and the residents who are watching this, they want to know what sir has achieved and get inspired to. Keki sir, could you unmute yourself?
To introduce Dr. Lane is like trying to introduce the Prime Minister of the country. He has managed single-handedly to handle an institute the size of JJ and bring it to a level of excellence for which he has received laudits from all over the whole of India. He is an exceptional man, and most important of all, I would like to stress that his work done for COVID at a time when leadership was required in Maharashtra has made the world of difference to us in Bombay. Very fortunately, if you'll pardon me saying so, he is now standing as president for All India Ophthalmological Society. And I think the AIOS would be very blessed to have him as its president, because I can think of no better person than that. Dr. Lane has been of great help to many people all over, and an exceptional worker, a fabulous surgeon, an excellent clinician. I give you Dr. Lane.
Sir, really, thank you very much. KK sir is like father to me. Because of him, I think I could do something in PECO and something in Mumbai. I really very happy that both this Ganga Khedkar sir and Vasant have joined. They are not ophthalmologists, but they are very good friends of mine. And Sagar, thank you very much for your last slide for me. Thank you very much, Sagar. See, this is not my domain, that is vaccine for COVID-19. But as you know, I'm one of the member of the task force of Maharashtra in the COVID vaccine. So every day, if I will get maximum questions from the common man, from the leaders, from the reporters, is about the vaccine. And so I thought, okay, Ragini asked me what he will speak in this. I told, okay, I will speak about the vaccine. I'm not a microbiologist, so whatever, if I'm making the mistakes, forget me. And Ganga Khedkar sir is there. He will answer if there are any problems. So I'm very happy because now I can say anything. Any problem arises, Ganga Khedkar sir is there. He will take care of the problems. Now see, my financial interests is never there for anything. There is one video that is downloaded by Sumit from the YouTube. What is the vaccine and how it works? So I will just share one video from the YouTube.
Vaccines and the immune response. How vaccines work. Influenza vaccines are able to trigger an immune response by mimicking viral infection. They are usually manufactured using inactivated or killed virus particles taken from various circulating influenza strains. Inactive fractioned viral components contain the subvirion particles hemagglutinin, HA, and neuraminidase, NA. In Canada, In there, they are met with an immune response mediated by various immune cells, including macrophages, T lymphocytes or T cells, and B lymphocytes or B cells. A major mechanism of action involves macrophage phagocytosis of hemagglutinin, breaking it into smaller components. After ingestion, macrophages display the hemagglutinin antigen on their surface in combination with a specific receptor known as the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. T cells are now able to recognize and bind foreign antigens that are associated with the MHC. Upon binding to the MHC receptor, T cells become activated and proliferate into either cytotoxic T cells, regulatory suppressor T cells, or helper T cells. Activated helper T cells express hemagglutinin receptors specific to the vaccine strand on their surface and play a major role in antibody generation and memory B cell activation. Unlike T cells, B cells are able to ingest hemagglutinin independent of the MHC. Once internalized, B cells process the hemagglutinin antigen and present it on their surface in combination with an MHC. When activated helper T cells interact with activated B cells expressing antigen MHC receptors, they begin secreting lymphokines, which have several effects. Lymphokines trigger activated B cell proliferation, which leads to either their differentiation into memory B cells or into plasma cells. Plasma cells produce hemagglutinin antibodies specific to the strain of influenza contained in the vaccine. Memory B cells aid in future immune response when exposed to an active influenza virus. When an infected host sneezes towards an uninfected person, the nasopharynx is exposed to aerosol droplets containing whole, live influenza virus. Once inhaled, the influenza virus attempts viral colonization of nasopharyngeal epithelial cells. Assuming that the vaccine strain matches that of the live virus, hemagglutinin antibodies block viral attachment of live influenza virus to host epithelial cells, and overall disease is either avoided or diminished in severity.
Thank you. Now you can see this central dogma of the biology. What is it? So it is this is a DNA, RNA, or protein. Because of that, we go for the vaccine, which contains the DNA, RNA, or protein. Now see how it acts. See the DNA vaccines. It is a DNA. It becomes RNA. Then it becomes protein, and that protein causes the immune response. That is S protein. Then the RNA, it is RNA. Then comes to protein, and then immune response. And if the protein itself is in the vaccine, then protein and immune response. So these are the various, we can say, the ways by which the immune response is produced. So gene for the S proteins, you can see the DNA vaccine. So here you can say this is the RNA, and then you can see you see the proteins, and this is the antibodies are produced. So the same it is a lipid nanoparticle, that is LNP, with the RNA inside. So this is the RNA vaccine, and in this you will see the lipase action is there, and then again the same, and you can see the antibodies. You go to the what are the DNA and RNA vaccine advantages, disadvantages? See, the advantages are cheaper in production, easy for the mass production, and safe for the immunosuppression, as there is no live pathogen in that. The disadvantages: efficacy. You don't know what is the efficacy, and the safety. These are the two disadvantages in this. Then the other is the viral genes inserted into a harmless virus. So viral genes are inserted into the other harmless virus, and harmless vector. This is called as a vector vaccine, carrying the coronavirus gene inside. So that is the vector vaccine. Now other is a live attenuated vaccine. Now this live attenuated virus is alive but less ineffective. So this is the, you can say, the virus. And the live attenuated vaccine is advantages: single dose gives us long immunity, the ease of production. Now here the requires the biosafety levels facility, cold storage facility. The mutation inside the body may have happen, and immunocompromised individuals it is not indicated. So this is what happens. The inactivated vaccine is there, virus is killed and then inactivated, and this you can say then used to produce the protein. So inactivated vaccine, the advantages are safe, no replication. Storage, the storage is at room temperature, and the disadvantages are the requires biosafety level facility, needs more injections or more doses, efficacy not known. So viral subunits are used, and in this the subunits can say the viral proteins, particularly the spike proteins, are extracted and made into the vaccine. Other is the VLP, the virus-like particle vaccines. So viral-like particles are synthetically manufactured to mimic the virus and hence they provoke the most immune response. So this is what is the mimicking. And the other is a split virus vaccine. It means here the whole virus is cut into the multiple pieces. You will see this, and these pieces are injected. So other is the mRNA, RNA induced antibodies. Here, instead of going for the protein, directly it induces the antibodies. So mRNA is not coding for the antigen interest, antigen of the interest, but that is the viral spike proteins. Instead, it codes for the actual antibody. That is what happens. So antibody directly without going to the S proteins. Now see now there are so many questions are asked. The active immunity vaccines. Now DNA vaccine. We know is the DNA vaccine, RNA vaccine. You can see the Moderna and Pfizer. That is RNA vaccine. The viral vector vaccine is Oxford, AstraZeneca, then CanSino Biological, then Janssen, then the Janamalia, the Sputnik, that is in Russia. Then the viral subunits, the Novavax you can see, are these three, that is the Adapt vaccine or Clover Biopharma. They are using the viral subunits. The live attenuated is it is in the Codagenics or Indian Immunological Limited. They are using the viral attenuated. The activated virus, that is a Sinovac or Sinopharm, they are using inactivated virus. VPL, the virus-like particles, up till now nobody is using. Split virus vaccine, that is a flu vaccine. RNA, that is a ribonucleic protein vaccine, they are using. The passive immunity, that is the antibody administration. It is a monoclonal antibody or polyclonal antibodies they are using, or the convalescent plasma, what we are using in the treatment, or mRNA induced antibodies. So these are the vaccines which are, in this Pfizer or this AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Janssen or Novavax, they are doing like that in this Serum Institute and other institutes are doing. So now where this is about the companies. So these are the different companies you can see. We also heard the Oxford, AstraZeneca, Sputnik, Moderna, Biotech, Pfizer, and doses. The doses are 2 or root and trial, where they are there. So everybody is near. Somebody has completed. Some are in the third trial. Some are in the second phase trial. Now the unanswered questions. When we are coming to the vaccine, the questions are the spectrum of the disease that vaccine prevents, the duration of immunity, because we don't know what is the duration of immunity, the type of population benefiting, children, old age. So what happens now about the duration of immunity? They are saying it depends on the T cells or the B cell. How many days that memory cell they will remember the this antibodies. Then that in the memory cells, that will be the duration. Now today it is known that definitely 5 months the neutralizing antibodies are there in the body, and so the type of population, yes, in the children they will benefit or not, or in the old age they will benefit or not. So these are the so many unanswered questions. And now As now, I think from 8 days before it was announced that I am one of the members and the FAQ. So the frequently asked questions, well, this is not only frequently, only asked questions. And how many, I will just show you the figure. Now this is the questions asked. So many questions asked about the vaccine and the problems. After vaccine also there are bigger problems. And these are the questions we'll have to answer. So other is the distribution of vaccine. How we are going to distribute? So many people are asking that how you are going to distribute the vaccine. Yes, there is a strategy that is going to be there, and that I can't share with you, but yes, it is a strategical movement, and accordingly that will be distributed. Why we are planning for the 2 doses? It is because primary dose, so response is B cell, T cell, and not the B cell, and that is a temporary response. But if you go for the secondary dose, then it goes to the B memory cells. So you have T memory cell and B memory cell, and that the effect of the memory cell, it is longer, and because of that, 1 dose is not sufficient to produce the T and B memory cells. Because of that, 2 doses are required. I have got the COVID already and have good antibody levels. So do I really need vaccine? And this is the question asked by so many people. Now vaccine is expected to be better antibody level and immune response than the natural disease. And because of that, we should go ahead with the COVID if the vaccine is available. So I think, is there any hope? Yes, I will show you. See this now. One day there was no anesthesia. You can see here, there was no doctor. See, in this situation, we survived all this without having present day technology. There was no technology, but we survived. So we have seen the Spanish flu, and in that, in India, near about in the second this one wave, out of 33 crore, 1.3 crore people died in India, because that time this technology was not available. And so, yes, we can survive. Vaccine, yes, vaccine is going to come. When is the Gangakarkar sir will answer. This when I can't answer. So sir is there, sir is going to answer, and that is his domain. I can say vaccine is going to come, and we will have to keep the patience. And once we keep the patience, I think up till now we have kept the patience. Again, keep it for 3-4 months, and I think we'll be out of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for a very enlightening lecture.
Keki sir, your comments?
And I think Dr. Lan has given a very exhaustive explanation of how the vaccine works. But I like what I would really like to as one would say, state is that when the vaccine comes, we all have to take it. There's no option to it. Whether you've had COVID earlier or you thought you've been exposed or you're not. Because I think that's the only safety we have. After all, at least from our point of view, we are exposed to it all the time.
Sir, can I ask one question?
Yes, you can ask so many questions. I told you, so many questions are there.
Sir, as you mentioned, various companies, the Oxford vaccine, the second dose is supposed to be given at 21 days. And J&J vaccine, they have come out with a literature that it has to be given at 28 days. So are we going ahead with multiple companies, or how to manage this confusion? Because every company is coming out with a different time duration for the second dose. Second dose, most of the companies are recommending.
Yes, Swapnesh, I think the second dose, why they are saying it is a 21 days and 28 days. That depends on what they are doing in the first phase, second phase and third phase. They are examining that when the B memory, this T memory cell is appearing. So what happens now? We have seen the example of the Punjab health minister. He was given the dose and after that he was positive. But to have this one, to form an antibody, that is T antibody, T cell in the body, requires 2 weeks. So in this one, in technologies, it requires 2 weeks, it requires 3 weeks, it requires 4 weeks. And accordingly, now they are calculating 21 days, that is a 3 weeks or 4 weeks. But when we are distributing, the person who has been given vaccine of suppose Oxford, and that is the second dose is after 21 days, second dose will be reserved for him from the same company on the same date, and that is also that it will be on the mobile, that he will be given the appointment so that's for that same vaccine. I can't, Swapnis, I can't hear you.
So there are few questions on the chat which will come up. I will ask questions accordingly whenever they come up on the chat.
Okay, no problem.
Ragini madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for, we are all very curious about the vaccine, because now that the COVID is subsiding, but we are worried about the second wave, and now life has to go on as normal. The surgeries have to start, the OPDs have to start. So we are all waiting for the vaccine, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for enlightening us.
I think I'll request Dr. Parikshit sir to introduce our next speaker. Parikshit sir, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, Professor Gangakhedkar sir, I don't think needs any introduction. Sir is a noted virologist, an epidemiologist, and he's worked with the National Institute of National AIDS Research Institute earlier, and later with the Indian Council of Medical Research. And as the epidemiologist, I think he was the face of the Indian Council of Medical Research in its interaction with the Prime Minister's office and government. And we are proud that, well, he's a son of Maharashtra. It's a Maharashtra ophthalmology program. And I think we look forward to hearing from sir. I mean, we are really blessed and honored to have him amongst us.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak on a topic which perhaps I would have preferred to speak little later because there are too many learnings, too many things. Not everything can be very explicit right now. So what are my learnings in the early experiences that we had with COVID? No, we took the virus very seriously. When it comes to that, we went for lockdown very quickly. One must remember that in first 2 weeks of the report from China, the first meeting started, including the meeting, every day there used to be review from cabinet secretary. All secretaries used to sit together, and then we used to argue on different issues and come out with different suggestions. Non-pharmacological interventions, as it was shown by Chinese military, was one thing which was a cue that we had, and there was no hope other than starting lockdown, because we couldn't have taught so many people, 135 crore people, about what should be preventive approaches as such. It resulted in a success. We delayed the outbreak, but at the same time, the bigger challenge was impact on migrants and the economy, which was unavoidable. But the lockdown helped us enhance production of PPEs, disinfectants, ventilators, RT-PCR machine, oxygen, and reagents, along with the ICUs and increase in ICU beds and training the manpower. This would not have been possible because we got almost 5 months time from the start of the outbreak here in India. SARS-CoV-2 in cricket parlance is a very difficult bowler. No, sometimes its bouncers come after a short run-up in different pitches at a very high pace and level. But you need to use a shield of non-pharmacological interventions and lockdown. Look at the current scene, which depicts you that in different countries, the pitch made a difference, the people made a difference, the entire curve, epidemic curve, started at a different point and reached a height which perhaps we could not have had ever imagined as such. We started with lockdown, but then when you look at lockdown as an intervention, you have to balance between the health outcomes and the economic impact that tends to be one of the outcomes. Now, one strategy which we learned was decentralized strategy. You know, where you could go by levels of outbreak, go for an adjustable seesaw for health outcomes and economic impact, and have differential measures in place in order to ensure that a balance is brought between these two types of outcomes. Now we need to remember that we were not ready to even provide diagnostic support. Our labs have been unutilized, have an unutilized capacity, and one thing which it proved, that they can rise to the occasion. Jan 21st, we had first RT-PCR in ICMR NIV, and at that time the global number of total cases was 314. And even by the Jan end, we used to conduct only about 4 to 6 tests per day. But today we have moved along, and today we have conducted even more than 1500 crore tests, 14 lakh tests per day, and you have a network of about 2069 labs across the country, of which 1141 are belonging to government sector. That was not very easy to do. We were the first in the world to approve rapid antigen test, but people threw caution to wind at that time. It was a risky decision because there were no countries which were actually using it. It was only India which we started with. Fear and panic about the tests, they tend to ensure that repeat test becomes very difficult if the first test is negative. The sole reason is you have to follow up this first test of rapid antigens in a asymptomatic individual. If the test comes negative, then you have to follow up with a RT-PCR test. That disbalance actually led to an outbreak which was little more than we had anticipated, to my mind. If you look at the backdrop, you have to understand there was panic among stakeholders, including doctors and the community, and that led to irrational actions. Now, if you look at doctors, use of medicines that were identified for research, they were prioritized for research, such as hydroxychloroquine, suddenly became standard of care. Now, this is something which was unexpected. We didn't know how to handle that. And this is despite the fact that there were enough of efforts to communicate on that particular event, but it didn't matter. No, even when we approved certain drugs for emergency use authorization, which actually mean that you have to take consent from an individual before you actually use that drug, that was also used as standard of care. Some learnings, some things which we can correct over the time. If you look at prevention and control of any deadly infection, you require two things, either effective drug or vaccine or both. Now, you look at therapeutic drugs. No, this is an entirely different scene because this is a saga of dropping ineffective drugs. No, you had certain drugs which were also ran in the category all the time, like vitamin C, D, and zinc, with no proven effect. And then you look at the list that starts from boosted lopinavir to even remdesivir, for which we don't have sufficient evidence. We started using them and started dropping them, which is unseen, unheard of in any outbreak. And that reverse approach has been something which must lead us to think through. What we need to remember as my own takeaways, you are more likely to add to history if you bet on a wrong horse, which has a repeated history of failure. Something like vitamin C, D, hydroxychloroquine, and things like that. One needs to avoid fantasizing on outcomes from one patient trials. You need to remember that part in your own practice and try and believe on robust evidences that come about. What we perhaps have to learn is we need to rely and practice what you know the best. What came to our success? This was high nasal flow oxygen, prone positioning, quality management of chronic morbidity, and the impact is very much visible. If you look at our cumulative cases number, it's too tall. But when you look at deaths per lakh population, India ranks, bottom 2, bottom 2nd, and other countries don't. The reason is we relied more on supportive care, and that is something which made the difference in terms of mortality. There are surprising winners in discovery of drugs and vaccines. My initial bet, I used to speak with my DG, Dr. Bhargav, that drugs are likely to win over vaccines, but it was absolutely wrong. The only thing, being little cautious, I ensured that we have collaborations on vaccine development and trials with Bharat Biotech and Serum and Cadila. All that, those vaccine development issues were greatly supported by ICMR. And the reason why initially we used to think like that, because if you look at vaccines past track record, you find that of the 6, you will find that we have not been able to develop vaccine. But at that time, we did not pay attention to the technological development of, of developing rapid platforms. And that's something which is essential to be factored, and it is going to make a huge difference in future tomorrow. The major challenges that we are going to see in vaccine scale up is vaccine hesitancy, because we have prioritized healthcare workers, and health literates are likely to create all kinds of issues with respect to vaccine hesitancy. Hesitancy essentially means, should I take the vaccine? Why should I take the vaccine? What side effects will come? And can I postpone that decision? And at the same time, you would also face vaccine eagerness among lay persons, because those who don't understand health, perhaps they will say, I want the vaccine at the first instance itself, the day it is declared. Now, if you look at one of the surveys that has been done recently, why people would say that I don't want to take a vaccine, they are worried about side effects which have not been completely studied. These are two fastly occurring vaccine trials. Some people believe it is not effective, and some of them will believe I'm not going to get COVID, given that the incidence is dropping down. And there are anti-vaccine lobbies that tend to exist. That's something which is a factor which will decide how successful we will be in scaling up the whole operation. One needs to ensure that the community is involved using different kinds of approaches, peer-led model or CPOL model or behavior change communication, to ensure that there is an acceptance and sustenance of non-pharmacological interventions. And we need to communicate to them that whether we would like to see peaks, as you see in other most affected developed countries. On the left, you see USA, which is reeling under third wave, whereas in India, the first wave itself has to still end, and perhaps we will never face second wave just because of these interventions that are coming up of recent. One of the lessons that I have learned is Spanish flu, SARS and MERS have proven that our memory and practice of precautions, non-pharmacological interventions, does not last long. We need to involve communities. And why do I make this statement? To me, for next 2 to 3 years, you would not be able to go away from non-pharmacological interventions, whether you are vaccinated or you are not vaccinated. And that's a reality which we will have to accept. Otherwise, you may face similar kind of issues that we would anticipate. Now, what is another learning lesson? We need to invest in health and sustain it. We need to develop a strong public health infrastructure. That's something which is a priority. When it comes to healthcare workers and the risk of development of severe COVID, one of the recent studies tends to show you that the risk is almost 8 times higher among the healthcare workers compared to those who are otherwise support staff. So the doctors, nurses, they tend to have a very high risk of development of this. You recall the early days of TB, hepatitis B, HIV, and now COVID. What do you see in the same sequence? People have developed courage, even among healthcare workers. They are becoming better and better in terms of handling highly contagious diseases as they perceive, with different interventions. We need to say hats off to the policymakers for an early and well-coordinated comprehensive response. which hitherto I had never seen. I was very closely associated with HIV throughout my life for almost 3 decades. But though it is a very successful program, I have never seen the kind of well-coordinated program that was developed by the leadership in the center. The community for following the advice, no, in a democratic country. In democratic country, you tend to argue more. We are also known as argumentative Indians. And at the backdrop that you have very low health literacy, you could argue far more than you can imagine. And then the non-health frontline workers who continued to discharge duty, despite the fact that their health literacy was also low. And most importantly, the healthcare workers, especially the doctors, and even among them, the residents, for their passion and untiring efforts, and the public health specialists who managed to control them at that time when it was required. And also the scientists across the world who responded with innovation so rapidly. They are the true pillars and winners. And their efforts are to give us a ray of hope for these future generation, that they won't be imprisoned or they won't have to follow the safe distancing or COVID appropriate behavior as rigorously as we are doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful, wonderful lecture. You put it, all of it, so succinctly and all in one place. Well, I think there must be questions, and I'll leave it to Swapnesh to take it ahead.
Yes, sir. Questions are streaming in, but most of them we have answered. There's a repetition of the questions regarding why the second dose is important. I think the audience can see our YouTube channel and re-see this lecture, because Lane sir has already answered those questions. There is also a question on the type of which vaccine is most effective. I think any of our two stalwarts can answer it. There's a question, which of the DNA, RNA, there are various subtypes of the vaccines which are mentioned by Lane sir. And there is a question, which of it would be the most effective? So I request any of the two to please answer it.
I request Ganga sir to answer this question.
This is my bigger worry is I can be quoted outside as an opinion, no? But there is one thing which I would say, all the vaccines are based on spike proteins. If you are seeing more than 90% response so far for spike proteins, there is no reason to worry with respect to efficacy of the vaccine. But the bigger worry is only going to be safety. And even in safety, we need to remember that though these are untested, unused platforms so far, one must remember that even in phase 2 and even in phase 3, we are allowing to ensure that 2 months period is completed in follow-up, which essentially means that the early toxicity, which is more likely to be very severe, is understood, and then we can take appropriate steps. Now, but still, it doesn't mean that there would be no side effects that would come. Especially, one needs to worry a little bit about DNA vaccines. I'm not very comfortable about DNA vaccines, because these are like, they can alter your genetic structure in the host cell itself. But rest of the vaccines, I would be far more comfortable. At the same time, one must remember that a decision to do something is based on risk-benefit analysis that is done individually. If the benefits are outweighing the risk, if the risk is over a very long period and the frequency of its occurrence is, let's say, between 1 in 2 lakh to 1 in 5 lakh, one needs to decide which vaccine and where to go. To me, this is going to be the best approach that we will have to adopt. We still don't have access to all the results which we would like to, which will happen in next 1 month's time. hopefully by then there is one more vaccine that is coming from Johnson and Johnson, where it's one dose vaccine. So we don't know which one of them will eventually win, because the major bottleneck is 2 dosages to my mind.
Yes, sir. So very true. We would definitely discuss the scientific aspect of the vaccines, but more important is the acceptability of the vaccine among the normal population. Just like in 2016 or 17, measles and rubella vaccine booster was introduced in 2017 by Maharashtra government, and it had to lead to that the leaders in the government had to vaccinate their own family members' children first, so that that confidence was developed among the general public, so that the acceptance was there. So I think the challenge to choose the best vaccine, and then there would be a challenge to spread the word and remove the fear factor among the general population to take it. Lahane sir, your comments on how to improve the acceptance.
And see the
sir, your comments on how what is the strategy to improve the acceptance among the general.
First of all, Gangakarkar sir, thank you very much. Secondly, the questions are asked there that there is not much information in the public domain about the trials. See, the public domain, definitely the information will come, but as it is a phase 3 trial, phase 2 trial, so the trial has not finished, and because of that, it is not there in the public domain. The second thing is the about the how the people, because the safety is very, very important, and as the people has got fear in the mind. So in that, now what is the strategy? Now see, the strategy is not supposed to be told, but I will tell you what is the strategy is that the people who are supposed to be a political leader, or people who are supposed to be a, you can say the people who are the you can say public figures, those people will be given vaccine on the, you can say, the camera. So on video camera they will be given the vaccine, so that automatically other people will accept. The other thing question Zawar was asking, was Swati, was that if I am having the antibodies, that I should take the vaccine or not. Just now I have told you in the last my slide that the vaccine is better than the natural antibodies. So that time we will decide what is to be done. But yes, the vaccine, I think there are both the streams, as the Gangakar sir was saying, and that in that stream we will have to accept the vaccine, and definitely this is going to help us in future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both of you for your valuable inputs. I request Ragini madam to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Vasant sir.
Yes. Before I introduce Vasant, no, Dr. Gangakar sir had put up something very significant, where he said that the acceptance, the people, the healthcare workers who need it are not going to accept it, and the laymen are just going to run without knowing if they have even contraindications of taking it. They are going to say that I'm going to get vaccinated, so now I'm going to be free of this thing, and they can create a big problem. Thank you, Dr. Gangakar sir. Dr. Vasant Nagwekar has studied MBBS with me from Grand Medical College, and it was always his dream to become a physician. When he was getting DNB nephrology, he refused it because he said, there is no hope for these patients, and I don't want to go into that field. He did infectious diseases from Apollo Hospital in Chennai, and then he went for a fellowship abroad to America. He's now an infectious disease specialist at Leelavati and Global. He's a very important member of the Maharashtra task force of COVID with Dr. Lahane sir. And I think this whole team has not only succeeded in treating patients from Mumbai and setting treatment protocols, but all over Maharashtra, because they meet every day almost. They used to meet now at least once or twice a week, doing morbidity and mortality audits and working day and night. So this is Dr. Vasant Nagwekar, and I thank him for joining us today.
Thank you, Ragini, for the kind introduction, and my dear friend. Thanks, Lahane sir, and all the members of the Ophthalmological Society, Parikshit, and it's a pleasure to be on the platform with Dr. Gangakar. It's really a pleasure to be with him. It was a dream, and that I could I'll just share my screen. So good evening, everybody. Today, my talk is on basically the diagnostics in the practice of pre and post COVID era. I just one slide. Of course, I normally when I give a talk, I speak half an hour on this talk, but I'll just speak for 15 seconds. What you have to understand is that there is an incubation period which is there before the person develops symptoms, and this is anywhere from 3 to 14 days, and usually average is 5 days. There's normally many people, the moment one of the family members is positive and normally the rest of the members immediately tend to go and test, and once they're negative, they're happy. But actually they would develop symptoms who are high risk contacts only after 5 days of being in contact with the person who has become positive. This is stage 1, where major 85% of the people would get better. 15% of the people will go into stage 2, that is stage 2A is pneumonia without hypoxia, stage 2B is pneumonia with hypoxia, and stage 3, 5 to 10% of the 15% will develop stage 3, that is a cytokine storm like or a severe inflammatory stage. So I think I just want to know that there are 3 stages. Stage 1, stage 2A is pneumonia without hypoxia, stage 2B is pneumonia with hypoxia, and stage 3 is a severe inflammatory stage. I'm going to basically take through cases, and I think that might be, I thought of choosing the cases because that will make you feel as if you're going to see the patient in the OPD or theater or in your hospital, and I think that might give you more input. So I'll come to the first case. A 70 years male to be posted for a glaucoma surgery. What are the various tests to do from COVID-19 point of view? I'm not going to discuss on the routine CBC, whatever, creatinine, all HIV and all that. I'm just specifically saying that from COVID-19 point of view. And this slide says that these direct tests which are available for COVID are the antigen detection. Will come to each of these in detail. The RT-PCR, which is the reverse transcriptase polymerase, the TrueNat, and the Gene Expert, which is also an some almost like an RT-PCR, which is to be done. So predominantly, what we are doing in majority of the hospital is the antigen detection, RT-PCR, and the Gene Expert, used for the diagnosis of COVID-19. RT-PCR almost takes around, I would say, 4 to 6 hours or maybe more than that for the reports to be released. Whereas Gene Expert, you can get the report within less than an hour's time. An antigen test would be less than 15 minutes. I think this is a time frame. So in Leelavati, we have the Gene Expert. So any patient who's suspected, whether we have to admit in the COVID or non-COVID ward, we quickly do the Gene Expert. If the patient has got symptoms or no symptoms, and then quickly decide on whether. So this is a faster turnaround time. Then there are indirect tests about antibody detection, which is not recommended for the diagnosis of COVID-19 at all. And then there are supplementary tests like chest X-ray, HRCT test. I've got one case where I would show you on this what is the significance or importance of doing a radiology in the diagnosis of COVID-19. So I think for us, direct tests are most important when we're doing this for this patient. So I would, for this patient, possibly I would do an RT-PCR conventional, or I would do a Gene Expert, that is CBNAT. As a diagnostic test, Gene Expert is good, but yes. So what is the chances that this patient, if he has got symptoms, would come positive? So if you see the RNA by RT-PCR, your chances that, in the first 7 days is around 70%, 60 to 70%. But as beyond 7 days, the sensitivity or specificity goes down to 54%. Antibody IgM will come positive only in the first 7 days in a very, very small proportion of patients. I would say this is negligible, and you may not get it positive, and this should not be the standard of care or should not be the test to be done at all for the diagnosis of COVID in a patient. If you see a patient who's intubated, compared to your nasal swab, which is around 60 to 70%, your patients are intubated, your bronchial lavage or lower respiratory samples will yield you around 93% positivity. Right. So what about antigen test? So in this patient, if a diagnostic test from COVID point of view, I would do a conventional RT-PCR or a Gene Expert for COVID-19 test. What about the significance of antigen test? This is from ICMR, which talks about the algorithm for COVID-19 test using the rapid antigen test. So rapid antigen test in global hospital, we don't have an in-house lab. So we do a rapid antigen test to decide whether the patient is positive. He goes into if the test is positive, straight away goes into the COVID ward. If it is negative, and if he's got symptoms symptom URTI, or even if he doesn't have symptoms, he goes in the holding area like, and symptoms, fever, sore throat, even if it's negative, he goes to the holding area and we send a RT-PCR there. And if it is negative, then we say most likely he doesn't have COVID. But if it is your antigen test is negative and is completely asymptomatic, possibly we declare them as negative, but its antigen test is like tossing a coin. It is only 50%, the chances of picking up tests. So positivity confirms, negativity may not rule out a test. So any role of prescribing antibody test for this person who has come for a glaucoma surgery? I think we have to understand that this is a nice diagram which talks about your IgM. If you see the IgM, sorry, your IgM will start coming positive only from day 7 onward. So very small proportion, that is 10 to 20% will have IgM positive between day 5 and 7. So it starts coming positive from day 7 and it peaks at day 14. So I would say almost all patients who are COVID-19 positive, realistic positive, will have their IgM positive by day 14. Almost close to 95 to 100% would have this positive, and usually it disappears by day 21, day 28. Whereas your IgG would start come positive only after day 14, and usually it peaks at day 27, day 25, day 28. So doing a antibody test is of no meaning, because what you want to do is know is whether the patient is harboring the virus or not. So this is more for surveillance or to know how much you are protected from antibody point of view. That is what is most important. So in this patient, the first case, I would do a RT-PCR or a conventional RT-PCR or gene expert antigen test. If you don't have the PCR, like global, we do. If it is positive, it confirm. Negative will not rule out. Coming to the next case, 78 years female to be taken for a cataract surgery, test positive and is symptomatic. Now, so she had come to you say a week back, and you tell her to do all the tests, and she calls up and says that, doctor, I developed some URTI like symptoms and I did my test and I'm tested positive. But doctor, what would be a good time for me to go ahead with a cataract surgery for this patient? So that's the question you'll have to answer. When would it be safe for her to be taken for surgery? So I think this is a second dilemma. And if you see this, so these patients, this is an arbitrary report. If you see what the E and the N2 gene, what we test is that normally you will see the reports anywhere between, I would say, 15 to 30 or 35. You would say this is as positive, and this is the CT value, that is cycle threshold value of the patient, and this is reported as SARS-CoV-2 positive. I'll come to this. What is the importance of cycle threshold in my subsequent slide? Ragini, I might take more than 8 minutes because I want to complete 3-4 important cases to complete the whole thing. And this is a report which talks about, which a patient would be completely negative. This is a gene expert which we are doing in Leelavati, which, how a positive and negative is there. Now coming to this same case, who came positive, who called up you and said, I'm positive, and let's understand what does it mean. So in the first slide, I said before the patient develops symptoms, there's an incubation period. So suppose if I have developed COVID today, my close contact, that is my wife, my parents, would develop symptoms only after 4 to 5 days. So testing immediately RT-PCR next day doesn't make any sense. So it has to be done after 4 to 5 days. For example, suppose you have a patient who has come to you and says that, doctor, I have no symptoms, but my father or my whatever, one of my family members has tested positive, who stays in the same house, but I'm completely fine. Can I just go and do my RT-PCR and come? And possibly your answer should be no. If he goes and does the test RT-PCR and comes back and shows you a negative report, that has got no meaning, because he may be in the incubation period where your test will be definitely negative. So average after the exposure to a close contact, it has to be between 5 and 7 days, because the incubation period is anywhere from 3 to 14 days. Average would be 5 to 7 days. So if any of your patient has come in close contact with anybody, the test has to be done only between 5 and 7 days, nothing early. Approximately 98% of the infected individuals would develop symptoms to do so within 12 days. If at all, they have to get a COVID-19 infection. Viral RNA levels are detectable in the respiratory tract 2 to 3 days before symptoms appear, peak at symptom onset, and decline over the following 7 to 8 days. By this statement, what I want to say is that, suppose if I am developing fever today, that means I am already infectious 48 hours before I've developed this fever today, and all those people who have come in contact with me 48 hours before today will be called as high risk contact, provided they have these three criteria. That is, the distance has to be less than 1 meter. Both the people should not be wearing the mask. And third is the contact time should be more than 15 minutes. So this happens best in the canteen or having food together. When you lower your mask, keep talking and having food, where the person is not knowing he is carrying the virus, but he is not developed symptoms. So that is what is important about the person is infectious 48 hours before he develops the symptoms. The capacity of the asymptomatic and the pre-symptomatic people to transmit virus prior to symptom onset is well documented. SARS-CoV-2 virus therefore appears to have similar transmission just like influenza, which is 24 to 48 hours infectious before the person develops symptoms. Now this slide is very important. How long, like this patient is asking you, when doctor, when can you operate me, because today I've tested positive. If you see, the maximal viral shedding occurs 5 to 8 hours before this. So this is the best time to transmit the virus before the person develops the symptoms, and culturable can be isolated. So the viremia remains almost up to 7 to 8 days, and studies have shown that the cultures after 8 days, usually I would say more than 95% of the times it is negative. That means the person is highly infectious just 5 to 8 hours before he develops fever, and is usually infectious almost to the duration of 8 days, in the maximum in the first 5 days. So first 5 days is the maximum infectious period. But our answer is still not clear when we should clear this patient. It cannot be 8 days because there are studies which say that viremia can go on up to 14 days. We'll come to this subsequently in our subsequent slides. This is just to show you that which is the highest infectious period. So our question is still unanswered. When should be this patient taken up for the surgery? And again, this slide shows that the infectious period of the virus is anywhere from just before develop symptoms up to 8 to 10 days, that I would say. Now this is again a slide which talks about the viremia, which is maximum in the first 5 to 7, 8 days and disappears and following the IgM and IgG body, which I already shown in my earlier slide. Now this slide is very important. So day 0, peak viral load and infectivity. Majority of the second infection occur during this point. By day 5, virus unable to be cultured in mild to moderate illness beyond day 10. That means this patient who had mild to moderate symptom, normally after day 10 is not infectious. And because why do we say that it is not infectious? Because even your RT-PCR comes positive, the virus cannot be cultured, and that is the hallmark that this patient is not infectious. But can we take this patient for surgery after day 10? No. Let's go further and see what happens. Less than 5% probability of the culturing virus in severe critical illness or immunocompromised patients beyond this point. So you're an elderly patient, so you will definitely not operate till day 15. What about day 20? Longest duration of infectious shedding by culture virus reported to date is day 20. That means you would say that you come only after day 20 or day 21 for the surgery. That is ideally the time frame to be taken for surgery. But yes, if the patient is completely asymptomatic, no symptom but tested positive, you may on day 14 do an RT-PCR by a conventional RT-PCR, and if it is negative, possibly you can take that patient who has been completely asymptomatic by day 14. But ideally, I would say day 21 would be an ideal time where you would take the patient. So this slide clearly tells you that when you should be taking this. So you will tell this patient, okay, you come after day 21, but should I do the test? I would say we should not be doing the test beyond day 21, because many times you may get a false positive report after even up to 90 days or beyond that. Now coming to this, what is the isolation CDC guidelines? CDC has modified their recommendations. They say for mild to moderate cases 10 days, and for severely ill patients or immunocompromised patients 20 days. So that means we would clear this patient only after 21 days. But patients who are completely asymptomatic positive, possibly day 14, a negative RT-PCR is good. But patients who have symptomatic beyond 21 days, possibly you may not require an RT-PCR, but that's a debatable question. Should you do or not do? But one thing I would say that do not do a gene expert. Okay, do not do a repeat test gene expert, because your gene expert is very, very, very sensitive, and it will pick up false positive for a longer time than the conventional RT-PCR. So ask for a conventional RT-PCR. So for some reason, you insist that no, I will not operate unless you do the test. So after 28 days, the same person who had positive you said initially after day 21 I would operate, but then you insisted that no, I would do a test. So after day 28, you still insist on a test and it's still positive again. Now, what is the significance? So this is the test. Initially, you see that the RT, the CD, this cycle threshold was 14.6, and now the cycle threshold is 43.2 and 44.2. Now, what is the significance of this CT threshold of 43.2? So this on day 28. But what I want to tell you is this: never use GeneXpert platform for retesting a patient who has been positive to find out whether it's become negative or not. You should be using only conventional RT-PCR because your GeneXpert is very, very sensitive and it may give you a false positive report. So demystifying CT values, which is corresponds to the viral load. So this is a nice paper which came in the Clinical Infectious Disease IDSA, duration of severe SARS-CoV-2 infectivity. When is it safe to discontinue isolation? And if you see, this SARS-CoV-2 appears to be most contagious around the time of symptom onset, and the infectivity rapidly decreases thereafter to near zero after about 10 days in mild to moderately ill patients and 15 days in the severely critical ill and immunocompromised patients. The longest interval associated with replication competent virus thus far is 20 days from the symptom onset. And these are by studies where they have done a viral culture. Now let's come to this, interpreting the PCR test of this patient who has a cycle threshold of 43. So interpreting PCR test results, cycle threshold and the nucleic acid quantitativity. Cycle threshold value, the number of PCR cycles required for the sample fluorescence to exceed a predefined threshold, provides additional useful information. That means higher the cycle threshold, that means the infectivity is less. The lesser the cycle threshold means the number of cycles required are very less to pick up the virus. The cycle threshold value is inversely related to the amount of nucleic acid present in the sample, such that every increase in the cycle threshold value of 3.3 corresponds to a 10-fold reduction in the amount of nucleic acid. So every time the cycle threshold increases, that means this patient's cycle threshold was 18 or 19, now became 44. That means the viral load is significantly reduced. And what does it say is that most SARS-CoV-2 PCR assay use a CT cutoff of less than 40 for positivity. That means, I think normally, even if the GeneXpert is more than 40, possibly you may consider this patient as negative. So that means so CT cutoff of 40 is used as a positivity. So patient in the early stages of infection usually have a CT value of, I would say 15 to 30 or less, but anything more than 40 means it is as good as negative. So this patient, even if the GeneXpert was positive, but the cycle threshold was 44, that means it is negative. CT values tend to increase thereafter, reflecting progressively lower amounts of viral RNA as the immune response clears the infection. CT values must be interpreted with caution as they do not reflect a true viral load, okay, which requires standardization curve. So actually, cycle threshold doesn't tell you the true viral load. That's very important. Now, assessing the duration of infectivity by cell culture. It is now clear that persistent RNA detection does not necessarily translate. Means just because the GeneXpert came positive in this patient when you told the patient to test on day 20, does not translate into a viable virus that can infect others. Because of the, why it has come positive in this patient? The reason for coming positive is subgenomic RNA fragments associate tightly with the intracellular vesicles that protect them from degradation by the host enzymes, which may explain why PCR tests are persistently positive in many patients. The US CDC reported they have not been able to isolate culture replication competent virus from patients more than 9 days from the symptom onset. So I would say CT value of more than 35-40 means it is as good as negative. CT values from upper respiratory tract specimen were higher following recovery from clinical illness, suggesting viral debris rather than the replicating complement virus is the reason for a repeat RT-PCR positive. It's the viral debris and it is not the viable virus. So what does CDC say? Role of PCR testing after clinical recovery, like this patient who called up you and told you that I'm positive and recovered. What does the CDC say? CDC now recommends that patients who have recovered from COVID-19 and remain asymptomatic should not be retested within 3 months from the symptom onset, even if they had a close contact with another infected person. This is based on the observation that persons infected with related endemic human beta coronaviruses become susceptible to reinfection after about 90 days. Now this 90 days figure over a period of time may become, 120, 180, we do not know. But as of now, we would consider 90 days. And therefore, a positive SARS-CoV-2 PCR test within 90 days of an initial infection most likely represents a persistent viral debris and is not a reinfection, not an infected person. So for new symptoms potentially consistent with COVID-19 that develop within 3 months are not clearly attributable and should look for an alternative diagnosis. Now let's come to another case. Here's a 67-year male. So in this lady, I think we should not have tested again, and you should have gone ahead with the surgery. 67 years male had COVID-19 in September last week. So now in October, November, so more than 2 months are over, and tested positive. And then, so last week tested positive, and then you told, no, you have to test again. And he tests and he's negative. He comes for a, so he tests positive, he tests, repeat test is negative, and then he comes for a cataract surgery. And you ask for a routine test out of curiosity. And the COVID test you ask after 2.5 months is again positive. He's completely asymptomatic. What do you do now? So you are in a fix, positive, negative, and now, just because of curiosity, you ask for a test after 2.5 months, again positive. So significance of patients who test PCR positive after testing negative. So Korean CDC reported on epidemiologic and contact tracing of 285 patients who recovered from COVID-19 who were tested negative and then again tested positive by PCR, just like these people. So they went and traced those people, what happened to them. So what they did was they did a viral culture of all these people, and they found that the viral cultures were all negative and the cycle threshold on all of them were more than 30. That means they were actually false positive because it was retested. So less than 90 days, that means should not be tested at all. So what if the patient comes to you saying that I had doctor, I had a COVID in July. So July, August, September, October, November, 4 months are over now, doctor. And now what about more than 90 days and the PCR is positive? So what about that? What about people who come to July and because of curiosity after 4 months you ask to tell them to do a RT-PCR? So the optimal approach for isolating asymptomatic patients who test positive again beyond 90 days from the original infection, for example, as a part of contact tracing, remains uncertain. We do not have an answer to this as of now. This phenomena in our experience is not uncommon, and most of these patients have high PCR cycle threshold value. So if your cycle threshold value is more than 35, or I would say 40 to be on the safer side, you can just consider as residual viral debris. We believe that the decision to isolate should be made on a case-by-case basis in consultation with the infectious disease consultant or an infection control expert or a local public health authorities to consider what should be doing. Last case, here is a patient who is father has died of COVID and he comes to you he wants to come to you with an ophthalmic examination within the first 9 days. You tell him to do the RT-PCR, both the time, 2 RT-PCRs are negative. What is the significance? X-ray, you're not able to interpret properly, and what else should be done? So here I would go ahead and do a CT scan where there's a very classical history of father died of COVID-19 who has come in high risk, and your RT-PCRs can come negative after 7 days, So if you have a strong history, you have to look for sometimes radiological evidence. So the role of CT imaging in the diagnosis of COVID pneumonia is also important, and we have to consider every patient as SARI for those people who have typically come in contact with the COVID-19 positive. So that was my last case. And this is my last slide, possibly second last slide. CDC's new quarantine guidelines, which has come on December 2, is that CDC now shows that those people who have high risk contact shorten the minimum amount of time people have quarantined after potential COVID-19 exposure from 14 to as few as 7 days. The new guidance says that people can come out quarantine after 7 days post exposure if they have no symptoms and a negative PCR test or an antigen test. But we have to wait for our Indian guidelines to come into this. So far for Indian guidelines, it is 14 days from the high risk contact. So let's come to the summary slide. SARS-CoV-2 is most contagious right before and immediately following symptom onset. That is 48 hours before he develops the symptoms. Contagiousness rapidly decreases to near zero after about 10 days from the symptom onset in mild, moderate ill patients and 15 days in critically ill or immunocompromised patients. The longest duration of viral viability has been reported is 20 days. So beyond 20 days, you can safely take the patient for surgery, even if it's tested positive. Persistently positive SARS-CoV RNA PCRs in recovered patients should not be done less than 90 days. That's what the CDC says. Common, but are generally associated with high cycle threshold values, that is more than 40, reflecting low viral loads. They do not indicate replication competent virus and are not associated with contagiousness. PCR assays that alternate between positive and negative, who come positive, negative results in patients who are recovered from COVID-19 most likely reflect sampling variability and low levels of viral debris at the borderline of detection. These patients are unlikely to be contagious. Thanks for your kind attention, and I would be happy to answer if any questions on this. I will stop sharing my slide.
Thank you, Dr. Vasant. Thank you for elaborate presentation. I think you have cleared all doubts about that. I think we can immediately jump to the next presentation by Dr. Sengupta. Dr. Swapnesh.
Dr. Sabyasachi, please share your presentation.
Dr. Sabyasachi was one of the chief authors of the guidelines that were published by the All India Ophthalmology Society about managing COVID. So,
Dr. Sengupta, you're not audible.
Yes, I think it's so. I think you should be able to hear me now.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm just trying to share my screen. Just give me a second.
Sure. Till you share your slide, we'll take one question with Dr. Vasant. Sir, there's a question, what should be the minimum tests that we should do before a cataract surgery? Does CRP, chest X-ray and RT-PCR suffice if we are planning any retina or a cataract surgery for this patient?
I think if the patient is completely asymptomatic, maybe X-ray, maybe as a routine test, but RT-PCR, either gene expert or conventional RT-PCR with a simple CBC is good enough actually. That should be good.
Okay, can I go ahead and share?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So I'll quickly share, I won't take a lot of your time. So I'll quickly share some AIOS guidelines that were published for management of COVID-19 and what's relevant today. So the ideal balance that we all want to achieve is avoid being a hotbed for infection spread, especially if you're working in large scale hospitals with a lot of patients. And then we want to resume normalcy as best possible. So that is sort of the ideal balance that pretty much all of us in clinical practice want to achieve. And so, to achieve this the full guidelines which were published from the All India Ophthalmology Society, it was a consensus statement, and a lot of experts from all over the country got together and published these guidelines, and it was published ahead of print in April 2020, and then it has had a lot of reads of more than 15,000 times, and it has more than 40 citations. So it made an impact when it was published. And so it really was, guidelines which was based on consensus statements. It was written during the first outbreak, and everything was in shutdown. We were in panic mode, and some actionable guidelines were required at the time. And these guidelines proved to be extremely useful at the time. But then, what is applicable from that even now is something that I thought we'll share very quickly. Initially the guidelines clearly told that there was a need for triaging, where you screen patient for fever, and then if it was Then you look at emergency and others. But then I think what is still very valid today is asking for the TOCC, or the travel, occupation, contact and clustering history. And if these are positive, then you look at them as potentially positive patients, and if they're not, then you look at them as potentially negative patients. So this is initially what the guidelines told us about triaging, and I think TOCC asking for that is still relevant today. And then a lot of triaging guidelines were given, but I think telephonic triaging is still relevant today. To ask for what is the exact nature of the symptoms, and if it's possible, can we have a teleconsultation? And then point of entry checking is, I think now it is universally being done, not only in ophthalmic, not only in medical facilities, but all over. So using temperature guns and pulse oximetry, I think it's really it's even relevant today because the virus is still amongst us. Of course, social distancing is very much relevant. Use of masks in all hospitals for all clinic personnel is definitely very relevant today. And the use of PPE kits, routine use is possibly not relevant at present. Then the guidelines, classified diseases based on the emergency level. So if you look at the red box above, this is straight from the paper. These tables were published, and it talked about emergency, which were classified, and different sub ophthalmic specialties. We described what was an emergency, then which was supposed to be seen immediately, then what was urgent, see as soon as possible, and then routine. But I don't think that is really relevant at present. But at the time it was published, these were really helpful. Then cleaning of waiting halls and emergency rooms, I think it's still very important even today. So what the guideline said is that every 2 hours or after every 3 patients, the emergency rooms or the waiting rooms which come in contact, especially with patients such as doorknobs, handles, tables, benches, etc., need to be cleaned with freshly prepared 1% sodium hypochlorite or 1% bacillus extra solution. And the slit lamp in our clinics is really the epicenter of it all, because that is where we really come in close contact with patients. And so slit lamp apparatus, especially the joysticks, switches, and all other parts, must be thoroughly cleaned with alcohol wipes after every use. The rooms should be well lit and well ventilated. And disinfection of lenses, indirect and direct ophthalmoscopes, pens, torches, and all other items are after every patient is still very relevant today, because like I said, the slit lamp is the real epicenter where we are most closely in contact with patients. This was the image which was published in the Indian Journal, which talked about different kinds of breath shields. I think that is very relevant even today. Like I said, this is the place where we really come in close contact with patients. So using breath shields really makes a lot of sense even now. And there were a lot of recommendations on use of PPE kits, when to use them, etc. If you can actually go over this, but this table I think is still very relevant, where you look at the first column, which talks about the COVID status, whether a patient is asymptomatic, whether he's suspect, or whether he's a confirmed COVID patient. And initially it said if a patient is asymptomatic and the risk of life or vision threatening is very low, then you postponed the patient consultation. But that's possibly not relevant now, where we are tending to see almost all patients on a routine basis. But all these others are still very relevant, where if it's asymptomatic patients, you use slit lamp breath shields with a 3-ply mask and protective goggles, surgical caps even now. And if it's suspected or a confirmed COVID patients, then the 3-ply mask gets converted into an N95 mask, and pretty much all the others remain the same. Additionally, you might want to use disposable plastic aprons and plastic gloves. COVID testing for all asymptomatic patients in April and May, when the consensus statement was published, it said that this should be mandatory for all the patients. So what we have we learned anything new since then? What really we want to answer is, if you test 100 asymptomatic cases for COVID in your surgical list, how many would be positive? Right. So this really depends on many factors, such as incidence of fresh cases in your geography, case positivity rates, types of testings that you do. And this was a study which was published from the Arvind group in Madurai, where they said that the case positivity in their OT lists after testing about 413 consecutive patients was 2.2. So they found 9 out of 400 odd patients to be positive, right? So though this is going to be dynamic, ever changing, and possibly going down if you are able to flatten the curve, but so you really need to think about whether this is a high enough number or not a high enough number. But so these are very sort of very high flow OPDs, so it may not apply to all private clinics. If you order the test, so interpretation really has to be in consultation with an infectious disease specialist, right? So Dr. Nagwekar has really nicely told us how to interpret these tests with so many nice scenarios. So I'm glad I haven't gone into a lot of details about those, but so we really need to back up if you want to interpret those tests correctly. And precautions in the OR, I think they're still very relevant, where the guidelines clearly said that air handling units need to have increased fresh air exchange. If possible, consider retrofitting dynamic UV and ultra filters to HEPA and reduce turbulence in the OR. Simple things like minimizing opening and closing the doors and moving machines will reduce the turbulence. I think it's really relevant even now. And quick surgery, so quick in and out by and possibly by the most experienced surgeons, so that the time spent in the OR is the least, is still very applicable even now. And PPE for all OT staff, based on what we discussed, like if he's a suspect case, you may not, but if he's a definitely proven positive case, you will definitely use it. If requiring general anesthesia, then PPE kit is also a must for all personnel. So the guidelines in May are still relevant today. And the OR cleaning after every case is of course mandatory, and floor and common contact surfaces must be cleaned with Bacillus Extra or Lysol. And diagnostic equipment, again, same cleaning and disinfection protocols to be followed after every patient, and can go ahead with all tests and with precautions, but all routine tests have of course now resumed. So really, in conclusion, what remains relevant from the guidelines? So very little really remains relevant. If you read the paper, it's about a 12-page document PDF. So there's lots of guidelines there, but what I've presented to you is about 8 or 9 slides. So it's very little is relevant in today's world, which has changed dramatically and for the good. I think it's good news that a lot of those guidelines are not relevant today. So like times have changed, and we seem to have in the curve as of now. And so the cornerstones still remain triage, hand hygiene, social distancing, disinfection protocols, masks, and PP kits rarely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sabyasachi, for a very succinct presentation.
Thank
you. Madam, could we take 1 or 2 questions? There are 1 or 2 questions.
Yes, we can take quickly.
Yes, there's a question for Vasant sir. For what are the usual costs of these direct tests which are done? The question is asked by Dr. Sunaina Malik, madam.
So I think the RT-PCR possibly is costing 1,500 only now. 1,400 to 1,500 is, I think, the universal charge. The Gene Expert may be costing slightly more, around 2,000, but otherwise I think 1,500 is the cost of the test for a conventional RT-PCR.
Okay, sir, and there is one more question regarding antigen kits. Which do you recommend, or which are being used maximally?
So I don't know the name of the companies which are being used, but I don't have an idea which specifically companies are. I don't have an answer to that.
And one last thing is, are there any ophthalmic manifestations that you saw in admitted COVID patients, maybe as a primary presentation or a secondary manifestation in an admitted patient?
So I had seen a patient, I think conjunctivitis is a very common clinical manifestation. Possibly you all must be seeing much more. Uveitis has been reported, but I have not seen a case of uveitis. But I had seen a patient who came to me with sudden vision loss. Okay, and that was possibly because of the hypercoagulable state.
Retinal vasculitis.
Yeah, so that way, renal, even the arterial thrombosis may also be reported, because it's a hypercoagulable state. So it can, it is like a cerebrovascular accident as well as cardiovascular IHDs, myocardial infarctions are we've seen huge number of cases who are presented before COVID or even after getting COVID also, meaning a patient comes to with MI or a cerebrovascular accident and you tested COVID positive, or you can the other way around, COVID positive admitted for a routine COVID-19, and then during his course of illness or even a post-COVID, after going home, they can develop. So I think this cerebrovascular accident. So similarly, I think retinal artery occlusions and hypercoagulable states can be seen as a manifestation during the course of COVID illness or even after the patient goes home. And that's why the role of anticoagulation comes into the picture about patients who should be anticoagulated and what should be the ideal dose of anticoagulation in these people, depending on the severity of the COVID.
Thank you very much. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, everybody. I think we covered so many aspects of COVID, though we thought that, there's too much of COVID going on, but there were some unanswered questions because because of which we needed to meet today. And really there was so much input, and especially, authentic input from senior and, authorized persons like Dr. Ganga Khedkar sir, Dr. Lane sir, Dr. Vasant, Dr. Sabyasachi, Dr. Sagar. I think, from Sagar's warm outpourings to Sabyasachi's practical thinkings to Dr. Ganga Khedkar sir's analysis and Dr. Lane sir's optimism and Dr. Vasant's pragmatic approach. I think it was such a beautiful combination. I think people would have benefited from all these things, and I think we were quite happy. We overshot a little bit, but I think the information that was given out was very, very important. Dr. Parikshit?
No, it's a wonderful webinar, and having so many learned speakers, and three of them from out of ophthalmology, and of course, Professor Lahane, with all the work that he has been doing for COVID, great work for the past 6 months, to hear it, and also to hear what is coming next, the vaccines, the waves, and the care we needs to be taken. I think a very informative and a useful webinar. And of course, Dr. Ganga Khedkar gave us the entire gamut of COVID right from its start and how we are doing. And yes, people nitpick about what has not been done, but if we look at it as a nation with a billion plus people that way, and with so much of poverty and illiteracy, I think our country has been managing COVID quite well. And let's hope it goes on for the better.
Swapnesh, you are muted. Swapnesh, you are muted.
Yeah, madam, could we take the vote of thanks from the secretary?
Yes.
Yes.
Vote of thanks from me.
Thank you, sir.
It is a marvelous webinar which you have had. I must say there are a lot of information which I never knew existed. And I thought I was well informed as far as COVID is concerned. I realized I wasn't. And I'm sure more must have also thought exactly of that. I think it was a lovely idea. We must have it more frequently, more so because the science changes regularly. Every 3 months, the management of COVID has in essence changed. And I think it's time that we upgraded ourselves. And thanks very much to Dr. Vasant, who really brought out very clearly as to when we can operate and when we cannot operate, and put it into clear-cut standard guidelines which we can utilize. Very marvelous. Thank you, Dr. Vasant. That really was marvelous.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you,
Keki,
for
sir.
bringing it to us.
Thank you, Keki sir, for being there. I mean, for us, like Pankaj kept on saying that having 3 Padma Shris, and he was so excited. Keki sir, you are a father to us in every way, not one. And thank you for, teaching me so much in my life, molding me with Lane sir. Thank you for being with us always, sir.
Always wonderful. It's the other way around. I should be thanking you.
Thank you very much, everyone. What a CME it was, with a galaxy of speakers and more important informations. I really thank today's speakers, Dr. Lane sir, Padma Shri Dr. Ganga Khedkar sir, Dr. Nagvekar sir, Dr. Sagar Bhuibar, and Dr. Sunny Sengupta sir for their enlightening speeches. Thanks to Chairman Padma Shri Keki Mehta sir, Dr. Parikshit Gopte, Dr. Swati Dhawar, and Dr. Viral Shah. Thank you very much, Dr. Ragini Madam, for bringing such CME, and I request you to have such a CME on a IMA platform along with the Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society with such learned speakers. Special thank to Mr. Raman, Mr. Atharva, and Team Mentor for technical support. Thank you all participants and viewers for making this CME a huge success. Thank you. This is all from me.
Thank you. So on behalf of Dr. Parikshit and the MOS and the scientific committee, we would also like to announce that next Thursday, same time, there will be a webinar from the Amravati Ophthalmic Society along with the Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society. So that is the next program that is due from us. And the last program of this year will be the Vidarbha Ophthalmic Society conference. I think Viral is there and they will be hosting it. So we will be doing it with them. So these are the two programs which are coming up. And I think you will all be interested in these programs and we would be happy to have you with us. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Keki sir. Thank you, Nagakirkar sir. Thank you, Parikshit. Thank you, Sri.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sachi, you are good here. बहुत अच्छा है. Sweetness, thank you. Goibar, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Good night. Good
Good
night,
night, sir. Good night.
Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.